Dad blamed me for ruining his marriage before I was even born. He wouldn't walk me down the aisle at my wedding because, as he put it, he'd rather spend the day with his real daughter. My parents had my older sister, Emily, when they were just teenagers. Because of that, she grew up more like their sidekick than just their kid. It was always the three of them, a tight little team. Both my mom and dad were career-obsessed, and they made sure Emily shared that drive from a young age. They were like a unit, focused on climbing the ladder of success together, always pushing for more. But when you're that laser-focused, cracks can start to form, and things aren't always as picture-perfect as they seem. Long before I entered the scene, my parents started having problems. Their relationship began to buckle under the weight of their ambitions. They were so wrapped up in their careers that they stopped prioritizing each other. That's when my dad's paranoia kicked in. For some reason, he convinced himself my mom was having an affair. They weren't going on date nights anymore, and they rarely spent any quality time together. Instead of addressing his feelings like an adult, my dad let his insecurities take over. The truth was, my mom wasn't seeing anyone else. She was drowning in her work, juggling a demanding job, taking care of Emily, and running the household all at once. Eventually, the stress caught up with her. One day, she collapsed at work. Everyone thought it was just burnout, but when she was rushed to the hospital, the doctors found out she was 3 months pregnant, with me. The wildest part? My mom hadn't even realized she was pregnant. She'd been so consumed by her hectic life, working, managing the house, and raising Emily, that the signs just didn't register. But when she told my dad the news, his reaction wasn't happiness or shock. It was flat-out denial. He accused her of cheating and insisted I couldn't possibly be his child. My mom was devastated. His words hit her like a freight train, and she was left to defend herself against baseless accusations when she was already stretched to her limit. The accusations cut as deep as actual infidelity. My parents fought bitterly, with my mom defending herself and insisting she had never been unfaithful. But my dad was too wrapped up in his own doubts to hear her out. Emily, who was old enough to understand what was going on, later told me that my dad stormed out that very night. He told my mom he wouldn't come back until she could prove I was his child. When the DNA results came in and confirmed I was indeed his, my dad was stunned. My grandparents, his own parents, were livid with him. They let him have it, calling him out for being a terrible husband and doubting my mom, who had done nothing but stay loyal while shouldering the bulk of their family's responsibilities. They rallied around my mom, making it clear they supported her and not him. They condemned my dad for his lack of trust and faith in her, and the weight of their disapproval seemed to finally sink in. After facing the anger of his parents and realizing the extent of the pain he had caused, my dad had no choice but to beg my mom for forgiveness. Eventually, he moved back in, but things between them were never the same. My mom made it clear that their marriage dynamic had to change. She had always been the one going above and beyond, balancing her demanding job, raising Emily, and running the household. But after everything that had happened, she recognized just how valuable her time and energy were. She told my dad, bluntly, that he needed to step up. His entire demeanor shifts to cold indifference, as if I don't matter. I've always felt the weight of his dislike, even as a little kid. Emily remembers it too. She's told me about how detached and neglectful he was when I was a baby. There were times when I'd cry, and instead of comforting me, holding me, or even acknowledging I was upset, he'd just leave me there. My mom, Emily, or a babysitter had to step in because he simply wouldn't. It felt like he decided right from the start that I wasn't his responsibility, that I was some kind of unnecessary addition to his life. He's always made me feel like a burden, like I didn't belong. That feeling became a shadow that followed me through my childhood and beyond. The only time he seemed to notice me was when I achieved something, especially in school. By the time I reached high school, I had become a relentless people-pleaser, desperate for his approval. And the only way I knew how to get it was through excelling. I poured myself into my studies, working tirelessly to get good grades, because I knew it was the only thing that would make him acknowledge me. But his attention always felt like it came with a price. I had to perform, to be exceptional. If I wasn't, I might as well have been invisible to him. It wasn't about love or connection. It was transactional. And year after year, I kept chasing that approval, hoping it would somehow change how he saw me. Deep down, though, I always knew the truth. No matter how much I accomplished, it would never be enough to shift his perception of me. When I went off to college, it slowly dawned on me that no matter how hard I pushed myself or how well I did in school, I would always come up short in my dad's eyes compared to Emily. It didn't matter how many straight A's I earned or how much effort I poured into pleasing him. I was always a distant second. Despite that, I've never felt any resentment toward Emily. She and I have always shared a great relationship, and for that, I'm endlessly grateful. Because of the age gap between us, she's always looked out for me, almost like a second mom. Emily is incredibly nurturing and protective, and she's gone out of her way to make sure I felt loved and valued, even when our dad didn't. Still, I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a pang of jealousy sometimes. Emily has the kind of bond with our dad that I've only ever dreamed of. They share a closeness, a connection, that I've always been excluded from. Part of me has always longed for that same kind of relationship with him. My mom tried so hard to bridge the gap, urging my dad to involve me and make an effort, but his heart just wasn't in it. No matter how much she pushed, I always felt like an outsider, someone who didn't belong in that part of their world. That rejection cut deeper than I can even express. After I graduated from college, I finally took a hard look at my life and realized just how much energy I had spent chasing my dad's attention. I had been running after his approval for so long, hoping for something that never came. It was exhausting, constantly feeling like I wasn't enough, like I was chasing an unreachable goal. So, I made a decision. I stopped. I stopped running after him, stopped trying to make him see me, and instead turned my focus inward. That's when I started therapy, and it was a game changer. For the first time, I had a safe space to confront all the pain and frustration I had bottled up for years. Therapy helped me work through those feelings of abandonment and exclusion and gave me the tools to start healing. As I began to let go of that need for his approval, I redirected my energy toward things that truly mattered, my personal growth and my career. I threw myself into my work, determined to build something meaningful for myself. Over the years, I worked hard to let go of my need for my dad's validation. It wasn't easy, and it definitely took time, but I've finally reached a place where I no longer crave the relationship I once desperately wanted with him. Instead, I found peace in accepting that it might never happen, and that's okay. Then, 3 years ago, John walked into my life and turned everything around for the better. He's tall, charming, and from the moment we met, there was an instant connection. We clicked so effortlessly, and it didn't take long for us to fall in love. Being with John has made me stronger and more confident. He's my rock, always encouraging me to grow and supporting me through everything. What I love most about him is how deeply he understands my family history, all the ups and downs, especially the complicated relationship with my dad, and he never judges me for it. In fact, John has a strong dislike for my dad, and honestly, I can't fault him for that. Whenever they've had to interact at family gatherings, like holiday dinners or casual get-togethers, John tends to keep his distance. He usually ignores my dad in much the same way my dad has ignored me for most of my life. When they do exchange words, it's always surface level. John keeps it polite but curt, answering with brief responses that leave no room for deeper conversation. My dad has never brought it up with me, probably because he doesn't want to admit that John is just giving him a taste of his own medicine. A few months ago, John proposed, and of course, I said yes. Since then, we've been deep into wedding planning, excited about starting this new chapter of our lives together. We both have stable jobs and share the same vision of a child-free future, which has given us the financial freedom to plan the wedding of our dreams without worrying about long-term expenses. We've saved up enough to make it a grand celebration, inviting all our family and friends, even those traveling from far away, to join us on our special day. It's going to be the perfect way to celebrate our love and everything we've built together, surrounded by the people who mean the most to us. While planning the wedding, my mom kept urging me to ask my dad to. My mom kept suggesting that I ask my dad to walk me down the aisle. It was something I'd briefly considered, but I'd never felt comfortable with the idea. Given the complicated history I have with him, it just didn't feel right. For me, Having him take on such an important role on my special day didn't carry the same sentimental value it might for others. Instead, I had someone else in mind, my uncle, my mom's brother. He's one of my absolute favorite people in the world, right after my mom and Emily. My uncle has always been a supportive, fun, and positive presence in my life. He's been there for me in ways my dad never was, and I've always felt a deep bond with him. When I imagined walking down the aisle, it felt natural for him to be the one by my side. It wasn't just about the act itself. It was about having someone there who truly represented love, support, and everything that mattered to me as I stepped into this new chapter. But when I told my mom I wanted my uncle to walk me down the aisle, she didn't take it well. She launched into a rant, saying it would be insensitive to give that role to my uncle while my dad was still alive. She was worried about how it would look to the rest of the family, convinced that people would find it strange or even disrespectful if I didn't follow tradition and choose my dad for such a symbolic moment. I could see her point to a degree. Having a father walk his daughter down the aisle is a long-standing tradition, and to outsiders, it might seem odd or even like a deliberate snub if I didn't honor that. But for me, this wasn't about tradition or appearances. It was about choosing someone who had truly been there for me, someone I genuinely felt connected to, in a way I never did with my dad. I felt torn between staying true to what I wanted for my wedding and honoring what my mom, and likely many members of our extended family, expected. But when my mom kept pushing, I reluctantly gave in. I agreed to ask my dad to walk me down the aisle, even though it wasn't what I truly wanted. Part of me just wanted to keep the peace and avoid any unnecessary conflict or drama leading up to the wedding. When I finally worked up the nerve to ask my dad, though, his response was far worse than I could have imagined. When I finally asked my dad if he would walk me down the aisle, his reaction wasn't what I had hoped. It was much worse. Instead of being touched or even considering the gesture, he acted like I had offended him. He flat out told me that he had never even thought about walking me down the aisle. In his exact words, he didn't really see me as his real daughter. Hearing that hurt, but it didn't shock me. Over the years, I'd grown almost numb to his coldness because he'd said similar things before. Even though his words stung, I sighed and tried to push through the conversation. I explained how much it would mean to Mom, framing it as something she wanted rather than something for him or me. I hoped that would soften him. If not for me, then maybe for the sake of family harmony. But my dad just shrugged, completely indifferent. Then he said something that cut even deeper. The only daughter he'd ever imagined walking down the aisle was Emily. For context, Emily has been vocal for years about her plans to stay single. She's made it crystal clear that marriage isn't for her, and honestly, it's been a sore spot for my parents for a long time. That's a whole other story. Still, the fact that he could so bluntly dismiss me in favor of Emily, even for something symbolic like this, was painful. As if that wasn't enough, he went on to casually suggest that I didn't need anyone to walk me down the aisle at all. He dismissed the whole tradition as nonsense, brushing it off entirely. His words were just another confirmation of what I'd always known, that the father-daughter moment I'd quietly hoped for wasn't going to happen. Not at my wedding. Not ever. I didn't argue with him after that. There didn't seem to be any point. I walked away from the conversation feeling defeated but not surprised. It was yet another reminder of the emotional distance that's always been there between us. After taking some time to think, I decided to follow my heart. I went to my uncle and asked him if he would walk me down the aisle. His reaction couldn't have been more different from my dad's. My uncle was absolutely thrilled. He said yes right away, beaming with excitement and pride at being part of such an important moment in my life. His genuine happiness reassured me that I'd made the right choice. After my conversation with my dad, I sat down with Emily and my mom to tell them what had happened and how he'd refused to walk me down the aisle. They were both disappointed but not entirely shocked. His behavior over the years had set a pretty clear precedent. Emily, in particular, was frustrated. She's always been more aware of the unfair way my dad has treated me compared to her. Both she and my mom agreed that if my dad didn't want to step up for me, asking my uncle was the right decision. Their support meant the world to me and made the whole situation much easier to bear. On my wedding day, my uncle proudly walked me down the aisle. It was a beautiful ceremony, and I couldn't have asked for a better person to be by my side. The moment was filled with so much love and joy. It was almost overwhelming. When John and I read our vows, the emotion in the room was palpable. There wasn't a single dry eye. Those vows were the culmination of everything we had built together, and it felt like a perfect reflection of our love and dedication to one another. It was one of those rare moments where everything felt absolutely right. My dad did attend the wedding, but true to form, he barely interacted with John or me. He didn't bother congratulating us, and during the family photo sessions, he stood off to the side, as if trying to pretend we weren't even there. I made a conscious effort not to let his behavior affect my day. Instead, I focused on the people who truly cared about me and were genuinely happy to celebrate this milestone with us. After the wedding, though, it became clear that my dad's strange behavior hadn't gone unnoticed. Word started to spread among the guests about how he had refused to walk me down the aisle. I don't know whether it was my mom, Emily, or my uncle who shared the details, but whoever it was, they made sure people knew the truth. Since then, my dad has been on the receiving end of some pretty harsh criticism from family members and wedding guests alike. People have been calling him out for being a deadbeat dad, even sarcastically congratulating him on his failure as a father figure. My mom filled me in on the aftermath during a recent phone call, laughing as she shared what my dad was going through. It's been interesting, to say the least, watching my dad finally face some accountability from the family. For so long, his behavior went unchecked, so seeing people openly call him out has been a strange but satisfying turn of events. At first, I thought this backlash would blow over in time, but last week he started leaving me voicemails. In these messages, he asked me to clarify to everyone that he had always been there for me to the best of his ability. He claimed that the family had the wrong impression and wanted me to set the record straight, essentially asking me to tell people it was my decision not to ask him to walk me down the aisle. Of course, I refused. It was a blatant lie, and there was no way I was going to rewrite history to clean up his image. After a few attempts to convince me, he seemed to give up, and I figured he had accepted the situation and moved on. But earlier today, he reached out again, and this time, his tone was much more aggressive. He demanded that I clear his name, because his relationships with other family members were starting to crumble. He even blamed me, saying this fallout was my fault and that my tantrum was ruining everything for him. What really set me off, though, was when he brought up Emily. He said he was worried that, because of the way things were going, Emily might not ask him to walk her down the aisle if she ever got married. Mind you, Emily has been very clear that she has no intention of getting married, but that didn't stop him from painting this hypothetical scenario where I was the villain ruining his future with her. Hearing all this made me furious. Not once has my dad apologized for his behavior or acknowledged that what he did to me was wrong. Instead, he's entirely focused on himself, his reputation, his relationships, and how this situation might affect his precious bond with Emily. I told him, firmly and without hesitation, that I wasn't going to give him what he wanted. I reminded him that he had made it painfully clear over the years that he didn't see me as his daughter, and because of that, he had no right to make demands or even contact me about this. I told him flat out that I wouldn't clear his name and that he needed to handle the consequences of his actions on his own. The way the family sees him now is entirely his doing, and I wasn't about to clean up the mess he created. Since then, he's been bombarding me with messages, trying to guilt-trip me. He keeps saying it's unfair, that everyone in the family sees him in such a negative light and accuses me of making his life miserable. My dad keeps trying to paint himself as the victim in all of this, completely ignoring the years of emotional neglect and hurt he's caused me. It's infuriating to see him act like I'm the one making his life difficult for no reason. Update 1. Thank you to everyone who has shared such kind and supportive words. A lot of you have rightly pointed out that, for my dad, this is all about appearances. It's not about me, or even the truth. It's about his image and how it's now being tarnished because of his actions. The sad reality is, he's never cared about me, and he never will. This whole situation has only strengthened my resolve to cut him out of my life permanently. For those wondering why I didn't distance myself from him sooner, it's because he was never really a big part of my life to begin with. I had gotten used to not caring much about him, but this wound reopened when my mom encouraged me to ask him to walk me down the aisle. I thought it might be a chance for some kind of reconciliation, but clearly, that was a mistake. Update 2. My husband, John, decided to step in and had a talk with my dad today. He told my dad to back off, and John didn't hold back. He made it crystal clear that he agreed with everyone calling my dad a deadbeat because, honestly, that's exactly what he is. John reminded him that, despite all the resentment he's harbored toward me, I've managed to build a successful life for myself. He told my dad that now that I'm married, he won't tolerate anyone mistreating me, including him. John went on to say that if my dad had any further issues with me, he should address them with him directly instead of bothering me. Since that conversation, my dad hasn't sent me a single text. Clearly, he's too afraid to stir up any more trouble with John involved. Update 3. To everyone asking why my mom and Emily didn't intervene more when it came to my dad's treatment of me, I want to clarify something. They've always taken my side and supported me. They never ignored what he was doing, but at the same time, they couldn't completely control his behavior either. Now, onto the most recent update. I decided to have an honest conversation with my mom. I told her everything. How I've always felt about my dad, the pain of growing up with a father who resented me, and how deeply it affected me. For years, I had tried to shrug off my dad's treatment, but now that I was a grown woman and married, I'd had enough. I was tired of being treated like I didn't matter. I told my mom everything, that my dad had blamed me from birth for something completely out of my control and that, because of him, I had grown up essentially without a father figure. Hearing this, my mom teared up. She apologized profusely for not protecting me better and admitted that she should have stood up for me more. She asked for my forgiveness, and I could tell her regret was genuine. I also told her that while my dad had stopped texting me for now, there was no guarantee he wouldn't start pestering me again. I asked her to talk to him and make it clear that his words and actions were taking a toll on my mental health. My mom gave me a big hug and promised she would handle it. Not long after, she, Emily, my uncle, and even my paternal grandparents staged an intervention for my dad. From what I've gathered, they all confronted him about his mistreatment of me and how unjustified it was. They didn't hold back, making it clear that blaming me all these years was completely wrong. They pointed out that the real issue stemmed from his foolish decision to doubt my mom, who had been nothing but loyal. I don't know every detail of what was said during the intervention, but it must have been intense because something seemed to shift in my dad afterward. Following the intervention, he reached out to me again, this time with a half-hearted apology. I'm certain he was pressured into it. He acknowledged that he had wronged me but stopped short of taking full accountability. He admitted that, while he couldn't help his feelings toward me, he would keep them to himself going forward and stop bothering me. He also apologized for refusing to walk me down the aisle and promised he wouldn't ask me again to clear his name with the rest of the family. This felt like the moment I needed to finally set a firm boundary with him. I told him that for the sake of my mental well-being, I was cutting him out of my life. I explained that I couldn't continue engaging with someone who had caused me so much pain over the years. To my surprise, he accepted my decision without much resistance. Update 4. It's been 7 months since I officially cut my dad out of my life. While I still see my family, I make it a point to avoid any events where my dad will be present, and luckily, he does the same. It's like an unspoken agreement to stay out of each other's way. Interestingly, about 4 months ago, Emily also decided to cut ties with our dad. She moved to a new city and blocked him on every platform. When we talked about it, Emily admitted she'd always felt guilty about how much better he treated her compared to me. She'd been considering distancing herself for a while, and the move gave her the fresh start she needed to finally break free. When my dad found out that Emily didn't want a relationship with him anymore, my mom said he was devastated. But at this point, there's nothing he can do to change her mind. As for me, I have to say I've been feeling so much lighter and happier these days. For years, I carried the weight of trying to earn my dad's approval, constantly wondering why I was never good enough in his eyes. Letting go of that and severing ties with him has been one of the healthiest decisions I've ever made. I only wish I had done it sooner. Now, I'm fully focused on my own life, on my marriage, and the people who truly love and support me. For the first time in a long time, I feel free.